Good morning, all. Thanks for joining us for our first policy virtual and action update here at MASSCreative. My name is Emily Ruddick. I'm the executive director, and I'm here with the team at MASSCreative, including Selassie Davies, Sophia Balsamo, and Tracy Konopinski. Tracy, hi. So we are going to get started. So this, I promise you, will be short, sweet, and to the point. So I'm going to start with some federal updates. The first piece is that 3 weeks ago today, the CARES Act was signed into law, which included a number of provisions which are supportive and helpful to the creative community. So the first one was loans to the Small Business Association, Administration, including the Paycheck Protection Program and the Economic Injury Disaster Loan. There were changes to unemployment, both increasing the amounts that the federal government was including for folks filing for unemployment, as well as for the first time, I believe, in unemployment history, including 1099 and independent contract workers in unemployment assistance. So that's pretty big, particularly given the number of folks in the gig economy in the creative community. There were funds included for the National Endowment for the Arts, the National Endowment for the Humanities, and then the Institute for Museums, Libraries, and Sciences. There was also a universal charitable deduction included. This was a $300 deduction that anyone could take, regardless of if they were doing a standard deduction on their taxes, to incentivize giving to nonprofit organizations, 501Cs, particularly 501c3s. So that happened 3 weeks ago. But already some things have happened. So yesterday, the SBA announced that the Paycheck Protection Program ran out of money. They went through the entire amount that was allocated in the CARES Act. I know that many of us are waiting to hear about our Paycheck Protection Program loan applications. I would heartily encourage you to reach out to your banks to just get a check-in and see what they're doing. I'm hearing that some banks are still accepting applications. The reason is that there's the possibility for a CARES Act 2.0. So Congress is talking right now to see about what additional monies can be added to that Paycheck Protection Program fund. One of the things that's happening is there's some advocacy around not just adding more money to that fund, but also including relief for states and municipalities that are really struggling in this moment. The other thing that we know is going to happen is there's talk of a fourth stimulus bill. So the CARES Act was the third in a series of COVID-19 directed relief funds. And there's talk about doing a fourth one. Immediately after the CARES Act was signed into law, Speaker Pelosi started talking about a fourth stimulus bill that would be focused on infrastructure. Then last week that changed, and it was about more just direct relief, because I think, we all sort of saw how quickly and devastating COVID-19 has been to the nation. They are still in talks. As I understand it, Democratic leadership is talking with Treasurer Mnuchin about what that fourth stimulus bill would include. We are working with our national partners to advocate and to make sure that we understand what's happening and be able to share with you what's happening, as well as opportunities to advocate for those. So the next piece I'm going to talk about is some state updates, right? So, I think we're all wondering how the state is responding. We saw, and I want to just acknowledge that as COVID-19 hit Massachusetts, we saw some real sort of exemplar leadership from Governor Baker and the legislature, moving monies and moving resources to help our frontline health workers and to protect our frontline health workers. And that's exactly what they should do. And now they are looking at, they also created a number of work groups to think about how they are going to address this pandemic and the relief that is going to be needed. So one of the things that happened and that I'm going to talk about is an action act providing for a moratorium on evictions foreclosures during the COVID-19 emergency. So this is a piece of legislation that would make it so that landlords can't evict you for non-payment due to loss of income from COVID-19, and that mortgage holders can't foreclose on a mortgage property. The landlord issue, the rental issue, is not just for personal domiciles, it's also for commercial leases for small businesses. So again, this is an issue that impacts and affects many of us, regardless of whether or not you're in the creative sector, but also would be direct relief and support to the creative community. And that's one of the reasons that we're following it. So it's, we also worked with our partners at the MACDC, the Massachusetts Association of Community Development Corporations, and the MAPC, the Metropolitan Area Regional Planning Group, to back the House version of that bill. The House version and the Senate version passed, went into conference committee. The conference came to a somewhat of a resolution, and both the House and the Senate accepted the conference committee's report. So last night, the House was supposed to formally vote to pass the this moratorium act. And then here's a fun little piece, right? So they are all working in informal session. So that means that they don't need quorum in order to have business happen because they're in informal session. This is a necessary public health precaution. But it means that at any point in an informal session, if a member of the legislature requests a call for quorum, it immediately ends the session. So late last night, they're going along, they're trying to pass this bill, and a member of the House called for quorum and immediately stopped the session. So the hope is that at 2 o'clock today, the House will bring this back for a floor vote, or excuse me, for a vote, and it will pass and then move on to the Senate, and then hopefully by the end of the day get signed by Governor Baker into law. The other big issue that came up this week in terms of the state policy has to do with revenue. So on Tuesday, the the chairs of the joint committees on Ways and Means and the Secretary of Administration and Finance held an economic roundtable. They heard from the Treasurer Goldberg. They also heard from a number of think tanks and economists around what the economic forecast is for Massachusetts. And I don't think this is going to come as any surprise, but it's bleak. We were having a very strong year financially in terms of state revenues. So for 3 quarters, there was strong state revenue collection. And then COVID-19 hit, and we're right now in the 4th quarter, and revenue collection has gone down. So what that means is that there is less money to use for any relief packages. And we right now should be in budget debates for next year's budget, but there's less money to think about for allocating for next year. So the legislature is being very cautious about how they're going to proceed. They have not announced how the state budget process will go. There's some talk that they may do it in portions as opposed to doing it all in one go. And then the relief packages, they are trying to explore what sort of revenue they can have. This is one of those places where what the federal decisions are impact the state decisions, right? Because what kind of federal relief is put on the table allows the state to either complement that or actually provide more support. So we're all waiting to see what's going to happen with that, and we will let you know. In the meantime, they are working really hard. I want to be real clear on that. And so they've built work groups that are trying to focus on where are the areas of most immediate need as well as long-term need, and what are the policy solutions to address that. A couple of other items we're watching, and I just want to let you know you can hear updates on in the coming weeks. So the self-insured unemployment issue for that, and some nonprofits face, we are watching that. So basically, some nonprofits are able to opt out of paying into the unemployment fund, and then if there is a layoff, they reimburse the state when that person claims unemployment. But no nonprofit opted out of unemployment thinking that there would be a global pandemic that would require them to let so many staff go at once. We're working with our partners at the Mass Nonprofit Network to advocate for additional support from the state, either a delay of reimbursing the state on those unemployment claims, or some sort of relief for those nonprofits in order to keep those nonprofits going. That's a really important issue, and it's one that we have been working on quite closely. There's also the possibility of a state charitable deduction. About a decade ago, the legislature said when things are looking up and we've passed some specific finance milestones, we're going to put in place a state charitable deduction. And this was the year that was supposed to happen. That's a big deal, right, for many of our nonprofits that are looking to help more people support their work through a charitable deduction and an incentivization. We are still working on that issue, and we are still advocating that that go into place to address the acute needs of our nonprofit communities and our nonprofit cultural and arts organizations. The final thing I want to just say is that, or about this issue, is that I think COVID-19 has really uncovered or revealed for us the precarious nature that the creative community sort of lives in, right? So many of us are so close to don't have a lot of reserves. They don't have endowments that allow them to deal with some sort of crisis like this. And that's why we're still going to advocate for a commission to study dedicated revenue sources for tourism, arts, and cultural development. This is a no money ask to the legislature. It literally is a study to take a look at how we can better support the creative and cultural community through public dollars. That was something we were working on before COVID-19, and we're going to continue to work on right now. Two other pieces of state level items I want to just share. So health insurance. I think many of us are discovering and having a lot of anxiety about how are we going to keep our health insurance going. Either we've lost our jobs and our access to health insurance, or our income has completely changed and our ability to pay premiums have changed. Well, the Health Connector has done a couple of things. So one is they've extended their enrollment deadline to May 25th. And we're going to put in the chat box the link to the Health Connector and a really good FAQ that they've got to help you see whether or not that's something you or someone you know should think about. They've also got the Connector Care program that connects qualifying Massachusetts to affordable health coverage. So this might be a better alternative than paying COBRA payments to extend your previous health insurance through your employer. Please take a look at that, and please share this resource with your networks and communities. And certainly not least, the Mass Cultural Council did some really amazing work to very quickly pivot and respond to COVID-19 and to support the creative community. They created an artist relief fund, which allows individual artists, teaching artists, culture workers, and creative professionals to access $1,000 relief grants. The deadline for that is April 22nd. We're going to put in the chat box a link to that. Please take advantage and please take a look at that. The other piece that they created is the Safe Harbors Initiative that includes free financial support for any nonprofit organization, regardless if you're a grantee of that organization. And so you can we're going to put in the chat box right now a link to that initiative. So I also want to mention, I talked about before that the CARES Act had provisions and money to the NEA, the NEH, and IMLS. So earlier this week, the NEA put together its guidelines and recommendations about how they're going to allocate that money. So the NEA has direct funds that grantees, if you've been a grantee directly from the NEA in the last 5 years, you are eligible for a grant through that. They also took 40% of the amount that they got, and those are being sent out to every state arts agency, and every regional arts agency. So for us, that's the Mass Cultural Council and the New England Foundation for the Arts. Both of those independent agencies are working right now to develop granting programs to redistribute that money. They have pretty strict guidelines about how they can distribute that money that the NEA has shared with them, but they are working right now to do that. And I know that's not an easy task, and they are really trying to think about how they can help support the whole of the creative community in Massachusetts and the region. So be on the lookout for that. Trace, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Hi, everyone. Tracy Konopinski, Program Director with MASSCreative. So I'm sure, well, thank you to everyone for putting your questions in the chat box. I'm sorry that we're running out of time. And so what we want to do in our follow-up is be able to get those answers to you. So look out for that. And I'm sure you're looking for ways to put your energy into advocacy action. And so I'm here to share with you 3 things. 1 is actions you can take right now. 2 are some upcoming actions that are coming down the pike. And then the last is regarding things that are outside advocacy that you can do. And apologies if you can hear the trash men and our great service workers taking the trash out of my street. All right, so actions that you can take right now is to reach out to your elected officials. That includes both your members of Congress and your state legislators. And we want to make sure that we're collecting lots of good data to be able to share these stories about the economic impact that is facing both artists and organizations. So on MASSCreative website, which Emily is going to show you, we have a great COVID-19 resource page. It has a drop down and you can go right to advocacy. And this gets broken down with all the actions you can take to Congress, to state legislators, your economic impact story. There you go. So the second thing I want to share is other ways for you that you can advocate. So what I've started to see coming online is a lot of state legislators are holding virtual coffee hours and office hours through both Facebook Live, Instagram Live, and through Zoom. So look out for those from your state legislators. You should also follow your legislators on social media if you're not already doing that. Like Emily mentioned, there's a lot that's happening in the State House, but their time is a little bit less structured since they're not physically in the building for most of them. And so a lot of folks are going to social media to provide those updates. And that's where I found out about virtual coffee hours and office hours for my own legislators. If you don't remember who your state legislator is or moved recently, you can go to that resource at the bottom, and Selassie is going to include that in the chat box, as well as the link to our advocacy page. And then some things that are coming down the pike is to write a letter to your legislator. We'll provide a template for the, to write a letter to the editor. We'll provide a template for that. And then we're also holding some legislative listening sessions virtually. So we'll be coming out with dates with those shortly. And then the last piece is other ways for you to take action. So if you have resources right now that you want to share and you feel fortunate and are able to, there's a ton of artist relief funds that have come online that are also donation-based. You can volunteer. There's a lot of mutual aid networks popping up in communities all across the state that allow you to volunteer to provide meals or to provide childcare or any other resources that may need to be provided. And the last is just creating community. I know that there's a lot of virtual creative hubs that are being created. We're trying to share those. We're trying to share stories about joy. So if you have any of those resources that we can also put in our resources online, please share that with us. And then Emily can point you to the section on our website and what it looks like in terms of resources. There you go. I'm going to pass this back off to Emily to wrap us up.
Thank you, Tracy, and thank you all for attending our first webinar, our Friday morning virtual policy action update. This is our first one, and we promise we will get better. So please share your feedback with us. You can see both of our emails there. If you have a question, an insight, or some insider knowledge you want to share about policy, either on the federal or state level, feel free to drop me a line. If there's an advocacy or organizing effort in your local community that you want to make sure that we can amplify and share with our networks and look to think about as a model statewide, share them with Tracy. We're also on social media, and we're trying to make sure that we're doing a fine balance of informing the creative community about resources as well as sharing bright spots about what's happening. Thank you all for your time. We are 4 minutes over. Just really quickly, Next week will be our next chat. It'll be the 24th at 9:45. Yes, 9:45. In the chat box now, you'll see a link to the form to register for the next one. This meeting is recorded and we're going to share it out, and we'll also include a link to register for next week's update as well. All right, team and all, please have the good rest of your Friday. Take care of yourselves, your families, and your communities. And thank you for joining in our advocacy efforts. We are only as strong as our collective advocacy voice. All right, see you all later.